Verses 21 to 28. Christ more particularly notifies to them the plot which one of their number was now hatching against him. v. 21. When Jesus had thus said in general, to prepare them for a more particular discovery, he was troubled in spirit, and showed it by some gesture or sign, and he testified, he solemnly declared it, cum animo testandi, with the solemnity of a witness on oath, one of you shall betray me, one of you my apostles and constant followers. None indeed could be said to betray him but those in whom he reposed a confidence, and who were the witnesses of his retirements. This did not determine Judas to the sin by any fatal necessity, for, though the event did follow according to the prediction, yet not from the prediction. Christ is not the author of sin, yet as to this heinous sin of Judas, 1. Christ foresaw it, for even that which is secret and future, and hidden from the eyes of all living, naked and open before the eyes of Christ. He knows what is in men better than they do themselves, 2 Key 8:12, and therefore sees what will be done by them. I knew that thou wouldest deal very treacherously, Isa 48:8. 2. He foretold it, not only for the sake of the rest of the disciples, but for the sake of Judas himself, that he might take warning, and recover himself out of the snare of the devil. Traitors proceed not in their plots when they find they are discovered. Surely Judas, when he finds that his master knows his design, will retreat in time, if not, it will aggravate his condemnation. 3. He spoke of it with a manifest concern, he was troubled in spirit when he mentioned it. He had often spoken of his own sufferings and death, without any such trouble of spirit as he here manifested when he spoke of the ingratitude and treachery of Judas. This touched him in a tender part. Note, the falls and miscarriages of the disciples of Christ are a great trouble of spirit to their master. The sins of Christians are the grief of Christ. What? One of you betray me? You that have received from me such distinguishing favors, you that I had reason to think would be firm to me, that have professed such a respect for me, what iniquity have you found in me that one of you should betray me? This went to his heart, as the undutifulness of children grieves those who have nourished and brought them up. Isa 1:2. CPS 95:10, Isa 63:10. The disciples quickly take the alarm. They knew their master would neither deceive them nor jest with them, and therefore looked one upon another, with a manifest concern, doubting of whom he spake. By looking one upon another they evinced the trouble they were in upon this notice given them. It struck such a horror upon them that they knew not well which way to look, nor what to say. They saw their master troubled, and therefore they were troubled. This was at a feast where they were cheerfully entertained, but hence we must be taught to rejoice with trembling, and as though we rejoiced not. When David wept for his son's rebellion, all his followers wept with him, 2 Sa 15:30, so Christ's disciples here. Note, that which grieves Christ is, and should be, a grief to all that are his, particularly the scandalous miscarriages of those that are called by his name, who is offended, and I burn not? Hereby they endeavored to discover the traitor. They looked wistfully in one another's face, to see who blushed, or, by some disorder in the countenance, manifested guilt in the heart, upon this notice, but, while those who were faithful had their consciences so clear that they could lift up their faces without spot, he that was false had his conscience so seared that he was not ashamed, neither could he blush, and so no discovery could be made in this way. Christ thus perplexed his disciples for a time, and put them into confusion, that he might humble them, and prove them, might excite in them a jealousy of themselves, and an indignation at the baseness of Judas. It is good for us sometimes to be put to a gaze, to be put to a pause. The disciples were solicitous to get their master to explain himself, and to tell them particularly whom he meant, for nothing but this can put them out of their present pain, for each of them thought he had as much reason to suspect himself as any of his brethren. Now, of all the disciples John was most fit to ask, because he was the favorite, and sat next his master. v. 23. There was leaning on Jesus's bosom one of the disciples whom Jesus loved. It appears that this was John, by comparing ch 21:20, 24. Observe the particular kindness which Jesus had for him. he was known by this periphrasis, that he was the disciple whom Jesus loved. He loved them all, v1, but John was particularly dear to him. His name signifies gracious. Daniel, who was honored with the revelations of the Old Testament, as John of the New, was a man greatly beloved, Dan 9:23. Note, among the disciples of Christ some are dearer to him than others. His place and posture at this time, he was leaning on Jesus's bosom. Some say that it was the fashion in those countries to sit at meat in a leaning posture, so that the second lay in the bosom of the first, and so on, which does not seem probable to me, for in such a posture as this they could neither eat nor drink conveniently, but, whether this was the case or not, John now leaned on Christ's bosom, and it seems to be an extraordinary expression of endearment used at this time. Note, there are some of Christ's disciples whom he lays in his bosom, who have more free and intimate communion with him than others. The Father loved the Son, and laid him in his bosom, ch 1:18, and believers are in like manner one with Christ, ch 17:21. This honor all the saints shall have shortly in the bosom of Abraham. Those who lay themselves at Christ's feet, he will lay in his bosom. Yet he conceals his name, because he himself was the penman of the story. He put this instead of his name, to show that he was pleased with it. It is his title of honor, that he was the disciple whom Jesus loved, as in David's and Solomon's court there was one that was the king's friend, yet he does not put his name down, to show that he was not proud of it, nor would seem to boast of it. Paul in a like case saith, I knew a man in Christ. Of all the disciples Peter was most forward to know, v 24. Peter, sitting at some distance, beckoned to John, by some sign or other, to ask. Peter was generally the leading man, most apt to put himself forth, and, where men's natural tempers lead them to be thus bold in answering and asking, if kept under the laws of humility and wisdom, they make men very serviceable. God gives his gifts variously, but that the forward men in the church may not think too well of themselves, nor the modest be discouraged, it must be noted that it was not Peter, but John, that was the beloved disciple. Peter was desirous to know, not only that he might be sure it was not he, but that, knowing who it was, they might withdraw from him, and guard against him, and, if possible, prevent his design. It were a desirable thing, we should think, to know who in the church will deceive us, yet let this suffice, Christ knows, though we do not. The reason why Peter did not himself ask was because John had a much fairer opportunity, by the advantage of his seat at table, to whisper the question into the ear of Christ, and to receive a like private answer. It is good to improve our interest in those that are near to Christ, and to engage their prayers for us. Do we know any that we have reason to think lie in Christ's bosom? Let us beg of them to speak a good word for us. The question was asked accordingly, v 25. He then, lying at the breast of Jesus, and so having the convenience of whispering with him, saith unto him, Lord, who is it? Now here John shows a regard to his fellow disciple, and to the motion he made. Though Peter had not the honor he had at this time, yet he did not therefore disdain to take the hint and intimation he gave him. Note, those who lie in Christ's bosom may often learn from those who lie at his feet something that will be profitable for them, and be reminded of that which they did not of themselves think of. John was willing to gratify Peter herein, having so fair an opportunity for it. As every one hath received the gift, so let him minister the same for a common good. Rom 12:6. A reverence of his master. Though he whispered this in Christ's ear, yet he called him Lord. The familiarity he was admitted to did not at all lessen his respect for his master. It becomes us to use a reverence in expression, and to observe a decorum even in our secret devotions, which no eye is a witness to, as well as in public assemblies. The more intimate communion gracious souls have with Christ, the more sensible they are of his worthiness and their own unworthiness, as General 18:27.